The Jae-myung administration faces a host of tasks on both the domestic and diplomatic fronts as it hits the ground running after winning the snap election just a week ago. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's June 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. We continue our conversation with members of the foreign media with regard to the leadership transition here in South Korea and its broader implications. For this, I have freelance journalist Yang Chien-Hao from Taiwan here in the studio. Chien-Hao, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello, good to be here.
I also have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio with us. Chloe, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Chien-Hao, we will start with you. Let's begin with a few words regarding the phone conversation between President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping earlier on this Tuesday morning.
Yeah, it just happened like 6 hours ago, 11:30 a.m. So the presidential office in South Korea has revealed that the President Lee Jae-myung has had a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And President Xi mentioned that he hoped to work with the South Korean new government to develop strategic cooperative partnership between South Korea and China. Then President Lee replied that he hopes that South Korea and China will actively cooperate in various areas such as economy, security, culture, and people-to-people exchanges based on the spirit of mutual benefit and equality. And then President Lee sent an invitation to President Xi to attend the APEC, which is going to be held in Gyeongju later this year, and express his hope for closer exchanges of views to further develop the bilateral relations. And President Lee also requests China to play a very important and constructive role in making peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and achieving denuclearization. And President Xi said that peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula are the common interest of both two countries, and China will take efforts to ensure them. So you can see that President Lee, first he had a phone call with President Trump, and then is Prime Minister Ishiba from Japan, and then President Xi today.
Right. Chien-Hao, there's also been quite a bit of speculation about the new administration's potential diplomatic blueprint. What have you been hearing with regard to regional security?
So for foreign media, one of the most important issues of the presidential elections this time is about the candidates' attitude toward the diplomacy and national security, definitely this time. And Taiwan has become a very hot topic this time. I've covered the presidential election here for 4 times already, from 2012 till now. And this is the very first time for me to see that Taiwan and the cross-strait relations between such an important issue and being mentioned so many times by each candidate. And when asked by the Time magazine if South Korea would come to Taiwan's aid in case of the attack from China, Lee Jae-myung responded that he would answer only when aliens are about to invade the earth. And 1 week before the election, I've also asked Lee Jae-myung's advisor charging diplomacy and security, Wee Sung-lak. Now he has become the president's director of national security of the presidential office. I directly asked him, what is President Lee Jae-myung, what is candidate Lee's position if the United States deploys United States forces Korea to assist Taiwan and even request Seoul for providing support? And he said that it is still too early to formulate a concrete or a clear plan for this kind of hypothetical scenario. However, if a conflict were to occur, were to happen between Taiwan and China, it will definitely have very negative effects on regional geopolitics, and South Korea will strive to prevent such things from happening. But when asked by other Chinese journalists, Mr. Wee spent more time, 5 times longer than me, emphasizing that South Korea do want to improve its relationship with China and strengthen various forms of cooperation. And regarding relations with China, now the current new government is currently very cautious and with a vague or obscure space referring to China. You can see that they are unwilling to criticize China as directly as President Yoon Suk-yeol did. And instead, they emphasize building multilateral relationship based on the Korea and the United States alliances and promoting diplomacy with China and Russia simultaneously. This is indeed very idealistic, but is this really feasible in reality? We'll need to see. Given President Trump's unpredictability, I think we cannot rule out any possibilities, but Seoul will need to convince Washington first.
Right. And just to be clear, Chien-Hao, your questions to Wee Sung-lak, they were made before he was elected president.
Yeah, 1 week before the election.
Right, I see. Chloe, with regard to national affairs, what decisions by the Lee Jae-myung administration as of now have caught the attention of the foreign media, do you think?
I would say the first thing that's been really interesting for foreign media is the economy. So, I mean, Lee Jae-myung has said it when he was a candidate, also when he started being the president in the inauguration day. His priority is on recovering of the economy, so that's at the same time for the people livelihood and also for like bigger economy on the industries and defining some key sectors. So that's, I mean, always of interest for the foreign medias and foreign markets, and that's something that people would look at. He has been putting in place an emergency economic task force quite quickly because obviously South Korea needs to work really quickly on this issue. Yesterday at a government meeting, President Lee called for measures to stabilize prices because he said that the increasing cost of living was causing too much pain for the South Korean citizens. That's something that we've been seeing covered in the foreign media. The other thing that's mostly what will the foreign media pay attention to in the future, I would say, is probably the fact that the government of Lee Jae-myung needs to restore the trust in democracy, something that we have been talking a lot about, obviously, because this election was a snap election made by the martial law. We've seen during the last 6 months, everything went like a big turmoil. And so there is a need to rebuild the public trust in South Korean democratic institutions. In his inauguration speech also, President Lee said that he wants to become a president who ends the politics of division. That would be another big issue. So that will take time to be done. Obviously, this is not the main priority that can be set up in less than a week. But I feel like this is kind of, they're already working on it, and there is no doubt that the foreign media will pay close attention to that. And this is the kind of subject that we will be checking on and looking at in the future.
Right. And before we delve deeper into the political polarization here, Chien-Hao, also with regard to domestic affairs, quite a number of activists are saying that the Lee Jae-myung administration should do more to remove roadblocks to renewables and to ensure equality across genders. What's the latest on this front?
So we have two issues, renewable energy and gender issues, right? According to the latest poll in South Korea, 92.6% of the people here believe that renewable energy should be expanded. And notably, more than half of the population here showed a willingness to accept burdens such as electricity fee raises during the implementation of policies for carbon neutrality. And after taking office, President Lee has mentioned that the government will take the lead in preparing for supporting and investing in the upcoming future, highlighting the construction of the renewable energy highways and try to boost the local economies and competitiveness through renewable energies. We will need to wait and see whether the new government really has the sincerity to make greater investment in renewable energy systems and also infrastructures. Another issue is gender equality. We can indeed see that the gender divide, this phenomenon among younger generations in South Korea still persisted in this presidential election. Among the voters in their 20s, 37.2% of the males supported Lee Jun-seok, a higher proportion than those supporting Kim Un-soo and Lee Jae-myung. However, only 10.3% of the females supported him. This phenomenon was also observed. We can also see that in the previous election in 2022, where the 20s age group, originally they are a very solid progressive voting bloc, split this time with most males supporting Yoon Suk-yeol and females supporting Lee Jae-myung. That was last time. And I still remember that the night when President Yoon declared martial law, I've rushed to the National Assembly directly, and also following the coming days, I was covering the stories. I can see that there are so many female or even feminism groups and even sexual minority groups, LGBT groups. They are all criticizing on President Yoon Suk-yeol's inaction on women's issues, also claiming that feminism has been turned into a slur used by men to insult women these several years. So now both women and men, they are dissatisfied with the current situation. However, in reality, women here still face a more like unfair treatment or unsafe conditions in various settings. For example, there you can see there are still like on the problem of unequal pay between men and women, and also like cases of discrimination and sexual harassment against female. This kind of problem remain prevalent. So the new government needs to carefully develop and gender policies to improve female rights, and meanwhile resolve the tensions between female and male.
Right, that is one of the national tasks here in the country. Chloe, beyond borders, apart from the presidential election here in South Korea, we also had elections over in Poland, in Canada, and also in Australia. Now, each election, regardless of its result, pundits are saying, we saw the so-called Trump effect. What can you tell us about this particular effect on the elections in recent years?
I would say that there is a Trump effect, like two different style of effects on the election. So if we take Europe, for example, the European far right seems to be quite galvanized with Trump's victory. So already last time under the previous mandate, but I would say this time even more, it's even more visible. So there is a growing trend in the far right groups in Europe, in the populist parties in Europe as well, that has been seen as a parallel movement to the Make America Great Again movement. So the more the MAGA movement is going up, the more the populist party in Europe are also feeding on it and getting bigger and more seeable. For example, so in Poland, as you were saying, they did the presidential election on the 1st of June. The candidate who got elected was backed up by the Conservative Party Law and Justice there. And he was also backed up by Trump administration, which is a bit more of a novelty, let's say. The US Homeland Security Secretary urged the people from Poland to vote for him before the election. So that could be seen as a bit of a weird turn of event from the US, who are usually not implicating themselves that much in European politics. We saw the same thing a bit further away now and a few months ago, but the far-right movement, Alternative for Germany, got second in the federal election in February. And I don't know if you remember, but at the time, Elon Musk, who was still a big part at that time of the government of Donald Trump, he was very strongly backing them, making videos for their political meetings. And that was the first time that a far-right party got such a big number of votes since the end of World War II, because that's the thing in Europe, like the populist and far-right parties have been kind of pushed away after World War II, and they're slowly rising again. The Washington Post made an article, and in this article they were interviewing a German expert from a think tank who was saying that in Europe and in the Western world in general, elections are slowly turning into plebiscites. And the problem with plebiscites is that they are opening the door for populism. So that would explain this Trump effect of making far-right rise. And then we have the opposite effect on Canada and Australia, for example. That's the New York Times called the anti-Trump bump. So the idea is that in both countries, you had moderate, more progressive parties that were not doing so well, kind of, wavering there. And the other party would be more far-right or closer to Trump ideas. Because they were following Trump ideas for these elections, they got very strongly sanctioned. And in the end, the moderates and the progressive got into power or got more powers. For example, in Canada, the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he definitely did his campaign on an anti-Trump motto. It was really also because Canada, being the closest neighbors to the US, was really surprised by the treatment that they got. Mexico and Canada were the first one to get really strong backlash from the Trump administration. So he won on that, and he also won because he was perceived as a more stable end to be able to manage transition and relationship with the Trump unpredictability, because, I mean, this is something that's playing on every level in geopolitical, in every country, I would say. So that would be the other effect, like the anti-Trump bump.
Right, indeed. Meanwhile, back here on the local front, Chien-Hao, as Chloe mentioned earlier, political polarization remains an issue here in the country. And despite the gap between the genders that you mentioned earlier, the division with regard to political inclinations is also quite severe. What have you been observing after the election?
I need to say that this 6 and 7 months, in fact, it is the most severe, most serious political and social conflict I've experienced in South Korea in my life, in my like 13 years covering here. Once at a rally supporting President Yoon Suk-yeol, I saw someone like ram a car at people who disagree with their views. And I also witnessed a passerby, a guy, he just tried to expressing that he's very dissatisfied with President Yoon, and then he was being soon surrounded by Yoon's supporters, and then they accused him of being a communist. So, and then when they covered the story, when they interviewed with the politicians here, the Democratic Party lawmakers, they're blaming President Yoon for vetoing bills passed by the National Assembly, which is controlled by the Democratic Party. And then the People Power Party, the lawmakers, they're accusing like Democratic Party leading by Lee Jae-myung, continuously impeaching officials and cutting budgets, trying to paralyze the government. So now that the election is finally over and Lee Jae-myung has won, this outcome deserves everybody's respect. And I believe that even Lee Jae-myung himself strongly disagrees with those conservatives. He still needs to try to listen to their opinions, or even incorporating some of their suggestions or advices into decision making. It will be a very good way to resolve the divisions. We've also seen that, like on his very first day in office, President Lee has met with other leaders from the opposition parties, which I think is a very positive sign. I hope to see President Lee meeting more frequently with those opposition party leaders and listen to their opinions. This will definitely help the conservative supporters feel sincerity and knowing that even if the president holds totally different views from themselves, he still values and cares about different opinions and voices.
Right. Hopefully they will find a path forward. Chloe, on a lighter note now, Korea's campaign practices, they're quite unique. Well, foreign observers have said they're quite unique. If you were to compare some of their campaign practices here in South Korea with those in Europe, what would you point out?
Yeah, so unlike Chien-Hao, I've been only doing 2 campaigns here. So I was there for the parliamentary elections, and then I was here for the snap presidential election. I would speak mostly, like my first impression here was like, obviously with all the music, the songs going on, it's quite dynamic. You see the election trucks going on everywhere, also very big banners. So it's quite colorful, quite dynamic, and it's, as you say, very specific to South Korea. I would speak mostly about France because this is the place where I've followed most of my election days, obviously. But in France, the campaign period are maybe longer and there are way more candidates. So there is a thing where they need to get a lot of information to the people and to kind of show that they are different from the others. So the campaign is more on people-to-people basis. So that would be very on to the people who are giving tract for the parties, or they're also going house to house in some of, like, mostly in the villages, but they will go to each person and be like, do you know the candidate program? So they are trying really to get to the people and to talk to people. So also French people love to make debate. So we are quite big on the TV debate, as we can see also in South Korea. So it has never, I would not say it makes or break a winner, but we've seen that sometimes on some debates, some candidates were not doing that well, and it has kind of plummeted their voting like appreciation. You could see in polls afterwards, people were kind of judging on the performance on that specific evening. Also, like, maybe lighter note as well, but political parties in France also have some colors, but I would say that they are not strongly identified with the party. So I've seen here, for example, idols who should not be wearing any specific colors. So blue, red is forbidden. Showing 2 fingers or 1 finger is also forbidden. This is definitely something that you would not see in France. You can't get critiques on this because the colors are not that strongly attached to the parties. And in the same way, that was fun to see also, like on Twitter or on Instagram, people were looking at all the photos of the idols here who have been voting and showing their hand with a very hint of color, and people are trying to find out if it's an hint of something. So that's also something quite different from France, where it's been like less so recently, but in France, stars and people from the show business are openly saying who they are voting for, and they will be putting their supports for one candidate on the campaign, and it doesn't seem like as big of a secret as it can be here.
You're right. Well, colors and numbers here in South Korea, especially during the election period, can have very big political statements. I think our stylists also here in Arirang were trying to stay away from the color of blue and red during that particular period. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Chloe, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
And Chien-Hao, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.